Before you dive into this incredible story, hit that subscribe button, like this video, and let me know your thoughts in the comments. Your support helps us bring more captivating tales to life. The Sterling Estate, a heart's revival. The dawn light filtered through the tall windows of the enormous mansion in Greenwich, Connecticut. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the faint scent of gardenias that Eleanor Sterling often placed in glass vases on the table. With her long hair and warm smile, she finished preparing breakfast. She liked to spoil James, her husband. Despite his coldness, there were fleeting moments when she felt him human, even tender. James Sterling was a powerful man, a millionaire by inheritance, but known for having built his own formidable reputation. Always impeccable, always distant. He loved control and hated feeling anything slip through his fingers. To the world's eyes, Eleanor was a fortunate woman. She lived surrounded by luxuries, with a chauffeur, a personal masseuse, and access to the city's most exclusive circles. But the silence between them each morning weighed more than any fortune. They had been married for 7 years. 7 years of treatments, frustrated hopes, and fertility tests. At first, James was understanding, even optimistic. But over time, his patience turned into impatience, and then disdain. "Perhaps this simply wasn't meant for us," he would say, without even looking her in the eye. One night, during an elegant dinner with investors at their home, one of the wives unknowingly asked Eleanor if they were planning to have children. James clenched his jaw, avoided answering, and abruptly changed the subject. Later, in private, he exploded. "Do you know what they think of me? That I married a woman who can't give me an heir? Is that what you want them to think? That I'm an incomplete man?" Eleanor broke inside. Her diagnosis of infertility, seemingly erroneous in retrospect, haunted her like a shadow. But more than the physical pain, it hurt to see James become a stranger. The man who once wrote her a handwritten letter for her birthday now signed checks to pay for her silence. Despite everything, she still loved him. Every morning she prepared his breakfast. Every night she waited for him with a cup of tea. And on each anniversary, she left a note hidden under his pillow, though he never said anything. One rainy afternoon, while James spoke softly on the phone in his study, Eleanor heard a name she didn't recognize. Olivia. It wasn't just the name, it was the laughter. Laughter he hadn't shared with her in years. Something in her stomach tightened. She didn't want to think the worst, but a pang of intuition pierced her like a thorn. That night, while he slept, she opened one of the drawers of his desk. There she found a folder with legal documents, and among them, a request for separation of assets. Signed, sealed, dated. Eleanor's world collapsed in silence. No scream, no tears. Only an almost inaudible whisper escaped her lips. "When did you stop loving me?" The next day, James left on a business trip to London. Eleanor, alone in the immensity of that house that no longer felt like hers, began to pack her things. Not by decision, but by instinct of survival. The harsh reality and a new path. The clinic smelled of disinfectant and hopelessness. Eleanor squeezed James's hand tightly as the doctor reviewed the latest results. Her heart pounding in her ears, she awaited a miracle. But it didn't come. The doctor's voice was soft, almost with pity. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Sterling. There's no progress. The probability of natural pregnancy remains minimal." James didn't even blink. He stood up, thanked dryly, and left without looking back. Eleanor took several seconds to react before running after him. In the parking lot, under a merciless sun, he uttered the words that would mark her forever. "I can't keep pretending. This isn't a life. I can't go on with an incomplete woman." The blow wasn't just emotional. It was a surgical wound to her soul. She wanted to reply, but tears came first. James, as if he had been rehearsing this speech for months, continued. "I need an heir. My mother, my family, everyone expects me to continue the legacy. And you hit me to a failure." Days later, she received a notification from a law firm. She had to leave the mansion in 15 days. Not only that, James had canceled her credit cards, suspended the household staff, and blocked her access to their joint account. Everything disappeared, except the memories that mercilessly hammered her mind. Eleanor tried to talk to him, called, sent messages, wrote letters that were never delivered. But James shielded himself with his pride. Rumors spread in the press that the marriage had ended due to irreconcilable differences. But within the walls of silence, the truth was crueler. He discarded her like someone discarding an investment that didn't yield returns. One afternoon, trying to withdraw money at a bank, she discovered that not even the card with her name worked. The manager explained with discomfort. "Ma'am, your account was closed by instructions from the primary account holder." She staggered out, feeling the ground disappear beneath her feet. In the solitude of the modest guest house where she was temporarily staying, she wrote in her diary, "He took everything from me, except what he doesn't see. The love that still remains in me, and the strength he underestimated." James, meanwhile, began appearing at social events with new company, Olivia Vance, daughter of an influential senator. The press called them New York's new golden couple. Meanwhile, Eleanor spent her nights washing laundry for neighbors, trying to earn enough to pay the next week's rent. It was on one of those days, exhausted and feverish, that she fainted on the street. And there, destiny began to change, though she didn't know it yet. A new beginning in the countryside. The rain fell on the rooftops of Hudson Valley with a melancholic rhythm, as if the sky shared Eleanor's mourning. She arrived at the bus terminal with an old suitcase, a blanket, and an envelope with the few dollars she had left. No one knew she was the ex-wife of one of the country's wealthiest men, and she preferred it that way. Aunt Clara, her maternal great-aunt, greeted her with tear-filled eyes and a hug that said more than 1,000 words. The house was small, with peeling walls and the scent of medicinal herbs. But there, for the first time in weeks, Eleanor slept without fear. In the improvised room she shared with dried plants hanging from the ceiling, she began to understand what it meant to rebuild from scratch. There were no gilded mirrors or Egyptian cotton sheets, but there was hot tea, silence, and, little by little, peace. Without a degree in hand or formal experience, she found a modest job at a local flower shop. She spent hours arranging roses, lilies, and sunflowers. Every flower she cut, every ribbon she tied in bouquets, was a thread of hope between her fingers. The beauty of the flowers, ephemeral and brave, resonated with her own life. One morning, while watering orchids, a woman came in looking for flowers for her mother's funeral. Eleanor, with a soft voice, put together an arrangement with such care that the client cried upon receiving it. "You have a gift, young lady. Your flowers console the soul." Those words remained etched in her heart. Despite the pain, something inside her began to germinate. It wasn't anger, nor resignation. It was a new kind of strength, quiet and serene. Sometimes, as she watched the sunset over the colorful rooftops of the Hudson Valley, she wondered if James thought of her. But she no longer cried for him. One day, while helping Aunt Clara lift some heavy boxes, she felt a sudden dizziness. She thought it was just fatigue, or perhaps stress. But that night, feeling a slight tingling in her belly, something awoke. A deep intuition, a whisper from her body that she couldn't ignore. She bought a pregnancy test at the pharmacy in secret. Her heart pounded as she waited for the result. When the two clear red lines appeared, her legs buckled. A warm cry broke from her chest. "My God, I'm pregnant." In the silence of the dark room, Eleanor hugged the pillow and whispered, "No one is going to take this child from me. This one will be mine, and will be loved from the first heartbeat." A miraculous pregnancy and growing fears. The buzzing of cicadas mingled with the dry heat of the afternoon in the Hudson Valley. Eleanor had been experiencing nausea for days, an inexplicable fatigue, and sudden dizziness. At first, she thought it was stress, or perhaps a persistent flu. But something inside her whispered that it was different, that someone, was growing inside her body. After weeks, she decided to go to the small office of Dr. Miller, a rural doctor known for the delicacy with which she treated her patients. The doctor, with attentive eyes and steady hands, examined her carefully. "Let's do a blood test, just to rule things out," she said calmly. But Eleanor already knew. Her body screamed what her mind still resisted accepting. 2 days later, she returned for the results. The paper trembled in her hands before she even read it. Dr. Miller entered smiling. "Congratulations, Eleanor. You're pregnant." She was speechless. A dense silence filled the room. Her eyes welled up, her heart raced, and a latent question hung in the air. How can this be? For years they told her her body was sterile, useless for giving life. And now, when she was alone, unsupported, homeless, she was pregnant. A miracle or a punishment? A gift from God or a cruel joke of fate? The doctor held her hand firmly. "Sometimes the body responds when we stop demanding it. Perhaps your soul needed to heal before allowing life to flourish within you." Eleanor left the clinic stunned. She walked the cobblestone streets as if floating. People passed by, cars honked, but she only heard her own heart. She returned home and, trembling, told Aunt Clara the news. The old woman cried with joy, hugging her niece as if she were her own daughter. But that night, Eleanor couldn't sleep. The weight of the decision began to fall on her shoulders. How to raise a child alone? What if James finds out? What if he tries to take him away from me? The memories of what he was capable of doing haunted her. She knew that if this child came into the world, she would never allow him to suffer at his father's hands. However, despite the fear, something new grew within her. Not just the baby, but an inner fire. For the first time in a long time, she felt full, complete, capable. It didn't matter that James had called her incomplete. Her body was now a home, her soul a shield, and her heart sacred territory. She knelt before the image of the Virgin Mary in the corner of the room and whispered, "Thank you, but protect him. Make me strong. For him. For me." James's empty success and haunting regrets. The ballroom of the Plaza Hotel was packed. Golden lights, expensive wine, and manufactured smiles dominated the scene. James, in an impeccable dark suit, toasted alongside Olivia Vance, his new fiancée. Daughter of a senator, beautiful and strategic, Olivia represented everything the world expected of him. Political stability, social heritage, a perfect image. But while she gave an elegant speech about her new philanthropic project, James didn't hear a single word. His gaze wandered to a memory, Eleanor's light laughter on a Sunday morning when he surprised her with sweet rolls and coffee in bed. Why was that simple thing 1,000 times more real than all of this? That night, after the event, James entered his new apartment alone, all silent marble like a mausoleum. He turned on the television, but the sound of the screen was pure noise. He poured himself a glass of whiskey and stood staring at an old photo stored among his books. Eleanor, smiling in the garden, holding a lavender pot. He felt a pang in his chest. It wasn't remorse. It was something worse. Yearning. A kind of emptiness that echoed, even surrounded by luxury. And he tried to convince himself that he had done the right thing. She couldn't give me a child. There was no future with her. But with each attempt at justification, the pain grew. Olivia was beautiful, yes. Educated, elegant, desired. But there was a coldness in her kisses, an absence of soul in her hugs that James now noticed. It wasn't her fault. It was that he searched in her eyes for a sparkle that only existed in Eleanor's. He began to have strange dreams. He dreamed that Eleanor called him from afar in a field of flowers, and he ran, but he could never reach her. He woke up sweating, his heart racing, and her name caught in his throat. One day, during a meeting with his lawyers, he heard an employee comment that she had seen his ex working at a flower shop in the Hudson Valley. His whole body tensed. Eleanor? In the Hudson Valley? He pretended not to care. But that night, he canceled dinner with Olivia. He drove to his old house, and he stayed parked outside, watching from afar like a stranger. The house looked empty, dead without her. He called his mother, an haughty and demanding woman, and asked her, "Do you think I made a mistake?" The answer was as dry as a razor. "You made a mistake in taking so long. That woman was never our class." But James no longer believed that. He no longer knew what to believe. He only knew that somewhere, her absence hurt more than his presence had hurt. And that, no matter how hard he tried to move on, there was an open wound that neither time nor money was managing to close. A glimpse of the truth and a father's realization. It was a warm morning in New York City when James stepped out of his armored black car, accompanied by advisors and photographers. The visit to the Roots of Hope NGO was part of a campaign to soften his image in the business world. The idea was simple: photos delivering donations, an inspiring speech, and then lunch with influential entrepreneurs. A facade routine. The place was simple, but full of life. Children ran among wilting flowers and broken toys. Women prepared food in large pots. James, with his practiced smile, walked among the volunteers. But something made his body freeze. There, at the back of the courtyard, with a floral apron, her hair tied in a braid, and a different glow on her face, was Eleanor. She was holding a box of vegetables and giving instructions to a small girl. What paralyzed James, however, was not just seeing her there. It was noticing what she carried in her womb. A prominent, lively, round belly. Eleanor was pregnant. The world around him fell silent. The sound of voices, the click of cameras, everything disappeared. He took a step forward without thinking, but before he could say a word, she saw him. For a second, time stopped. Eleanor's eyes widened in surprise, and her expression went from astonishment to fury in a matter of seconds. She turned her face, handed the box to another volunteer, and walked towards the makeshift kitchen without addressing a single word to him. James felt a blow to his chest. How is this possible? Whose child is that? And why didn't she tell me? His head spun with 1,000 questions, all unanswered. He spent the rest of the visit on autopilot. He gave his speech, posed for photos, but in his mind, only one image existed: Eleanor, radiant, full, with her child. Because deep down, something inside him told him that baby was his. And with that idea came a second, even more devastating blow. He left her just when she had finally given life to what he so desired. In the car back, his advisors spoke enthusiastically about the success of the visit. James, in silence, looked at his reflection in the window. He remembered the last time he saw her, crying with the divorce papers in her hands. He thought she was broken. But now the one who seemed in ruins was him. Upon arriving home, he went straight to the bar. He poured himself a double whiskey and called the private detective he had secretly employed for years. "I need you to investigate Eleanor Sterling. Where does she live? Who is she with? And how long has she been pregnant?" His voice trembled, not with rage, but with something James no longer knew how to name. Guilt. Meanwhile, in the Hudson Valley, Eleanor closed her eyes in the small NGO office where she sometimes slept. The reunion had shaken her deeply, but her heart was as clear as the moon illuminating the night. "I will not let him break me again. Not me, nor my child." The haunting truth, and a cry for forgiveness. The sound of whiskey hitting the glass was the only noise in the dark apartment. James spent his nights staring at the ceiling, Eleanor's face etched in his mind, like a burning tattoo. Pregnant? After all the doctor said, "It can't be mine. It can't." That's what he repeated like a mantra, but doubt had already set in, and was growing like a slow poison. In the following days, James became a ghost. He canceled meetings, avoided Olivia, and ordered his private detective to report Eleanor's every move. He received photos daily, her attending to customers at the flower shop, helping out at the NGO's workshops, buying fruit at the market with one hand on her belly, and always smiling. That last part tormented him. Why does she look so happy? How can she be so fulfilled without me? The question hurt more than he wanted to admit. For years he believed she depended on him, that without his protection she would wither. But there she was, blossoming without him, and perhaps with his child in her womb. James began to drive alone to the Hudson Valley on weekends, without telling anyone. He would stay in his car, observing from afar with dark glasses and the engine off. One afternoon, he saw her helping a child draw flowers on a community mural. The child rested his head on her belly and said, "Have you talked to your baby yet? I talk to my little brother like that." She laughed and replied, "Of course, I tell him everything." That was too much. James gripped the steering wheel tightly, his eyes burning. That child, that gesture, he was the one who dreamed of that moment. And yet, he had ruined everything, with harsh words and proud decisions. But he still clung to excuses. He told himself that maybe she was with someone else, that perhaps she had moved on quickly. "I have no proof that child is mine. I can't assume something like that without certainty." But deep down, he already knew. He knew her eyes. He knew his own timing. And the baby would be born exactly 8 months after the divorce. One night, drunk and consumed by anguish, James called Eleanor. She didn't answer. He sent a message. "We need to talk." She replied hours later, dryly, "There's nothing to say. What you broke cannot be mended with words." He threw his phone against the wall. The sound of glass shattering echoed in the empty living room. Loneliness, for the first time, was deafening. No glass of wine, no Persian rug, no imported car eased the hole in his chest. Regret began to burn inside, but his pride still fought to extinguish the fire. And as happens with men who love too late, James discovered that denial was just the beginning of the fall. Ghosts of the past and a path to understanding, the rain fell heavily that night, exactly like the first time James and Eleanor kissed. He stood in his library, holding a framed photo of them both. She laughing, eyes closed, as he held her in his arms in front of a fountain in Saratoga Springs. That laughter he could still hear. Memories came like tides, without warning. He remembered the first time they talked about having children. They were lying on the grass in Lake Placid, after a hike. Eleanor, her head on his chest, said, "I've always dreamed of having a little girl with your smile." He laughed and replied, "And Eleanor, I've always been afraid of being a father." She looked at him confused, but he looked away. The truth was that James carried a pain he never knew how to name. His father abandoned him when he was 8. He grew up hearing his mother say that men are good for nothing. When he finally inherited the family business, he swore he would never be weak, that he would never depend on anyone. And deep down he believed that loving too much was a risk, an invitation to loss. But with Eleanor, everything seemed easier. At first, she was his light, his refuge. He remembered how she decorated the house with flowers, how she sang old songs while cooking, how she looked at him as if he were more than just a man in business magazines. She made him feel human. Over the years, the pressure to have children came like an avalanche. Family dinners, veiled conversations, inquisitive glances. James wanted to be a father. Yes, he did, but he was terrified of failing, of repeating the abandonment he himself had suffered. When the tests revealed difficulties, he froze. He began to distance himself, not from a lack of love, but from fear of feeling powerless. He remembered a night when he found Eleanor crying alone in the bathroom, clutching a negative test. He wanted to comfort her, but he stood at the door, not knowing what to say. He ended up returning to the office, faking an important call. That still haunted him, and then came the breakup. The harsh words, the divorce, the cold signature on the papers. He told himself it was the right thing to do, that he needed an heir. But now, faced with the memory of the love he lost, everything seemed like a house of cards. And he, the man who knocked it down with his own hands. James lay on the sofa, staring at the ceiling, his eyes burning. He felt like the 8-year-old boy who waited for his father at the door, and that night understood he would never return. Perhaps that's why I pushed her away, because when I needed her most, I didn't know how to hold on to her. And now she too was gone. But this time, there was still a chance. Or was it already too late? A desperate dash and a miraculous birth. The sun began to set over the Catskill Mountains when James finally gathered the courage. He wore a simple shirt, no tie, trying to appear less like himself. The black car was parked 2 blocks back. He wanted her to see him as a man, not as a magnate. The flower shop was about to close. The small bell on the door chimed softly when he entered. Eleanor, her back turned, was arranging a vase of sunflowers. Hearing him, she slowly turned. The air froze between them. He said nothing for a moment. He just looked at her, her eyes firm, her belly more visible, the silence sharp. "I need to know if that child is mine," he said directly in a low, firm voice. Eleanor felt her heart plummet. She gripped her apron tightly. She took a deep breath. The accumulated pain of months burned in her throat. "Now you're interested? Now you have time to come and ask me something you lost the right to know?" James tried to approach, but she stepped back. Her eyes were moist, but her voice came out firmly. "You called me incomplete. You took everything from me. You left me alone, broken. And now that you see me alive, strong, with a child you didn't expect, you come to claim as if you still had a place in my story." He swallowed. That hurt more than he had imagined, but he insisted. "I'm not claiming. I just want to know the truth. If it's mine, I want to take responsibility. I won't run." Eleanor laughed bitterly. "Take responsibility? James, I don't need your money or your belated promises. I don't want your guilt disguised as responsibility. This child will not grow up hearing he was an accident. He will know he was wanted. By me. From the first heartbeat." A heavy silence fell between them. James tried to say something else, but she turned and opened the shop door firmly. "Go. Don't come back. You have no right to this baby, much less to me." He left slowly, his chest aflame. Each step away from her was like walking on embers. For the first time, James Sterling experienced the real weight of his decisions. He wasn't rejected by chance. It was a consequence. The thin rain fell on the city, as if the sky too were in mourning. James drove slowly, almost aimlessly. But his heart led him to a specific destination, the old house where he lived with Eleanor. He parked in front of the iron gate, now covered in rust. The house was empty, for sale. A garden without flowers, dusty windows, and a screaming silence. He got out of the car and touched the gate, as if expecting her to still open the door, smiling. But all he found were memories. In the garden, he remembered Eleanor with her hands full of dirt planting daisies. On the terrace, they would both drink coffee while talking about the future, a future he himself destroyed. Moved by something he couldn't even explain, he drove to his grandmother Mary's house, the only family member who always spoke to him honestly. She received him with surprise, but also with tenderness. She looked him in the eyes and said bluntly, "You look like your grandfather when he lost the love of his life. Tough on the outside, empty on the inside." James sat on the old armchair in the living room, his head bowed. He told her everything: Eleanor's pregnancy, the encounter at the NGO, the confrontation at the flower shop. He expected to be judged, but received silence. Until Mary got up, went to an old drawer, and returned with a yellowed envelope. "This arrived months ago. The young woman left it with a neighbor. I suppose it was for you, but you were so busy running away that you never found out." James took the letter with trembling hands. It was Eleanor's handwriting. He opened it carefully. The paper smelled of lavender and nostalgia. "James, I know you're leaving. I know I'm no longer the woman you want, but I want you to know something before you disappear completely from my life. I never stopped dreaming of you, not even when pain tore me in two. I don't know if you'll ever forgive me for not being able to give you a child, but if someday the miracle comes, I want you to know that you were the first man I imagined as a father. With all that I have left, Eleanor." The words crushed him. A love letter, written shortly before the end. A declaration of hope and pain, never read. James cried. Not as a businessman, not as a public figure, but as a broken human being. "What have I done, Grandma? How could I be so blind?" Mary approached, caressed his face, and simply said, "Sometimes the hardest heart is the one most afraid to love. But if it still beats for her, don't give up." The silent dawn was breaking over the Hudson Valley when a sharp pain woke Eleanor from a restless sleep. It was too soon. She still had weeks until her due date, but something wasn't right. She felt the contraction like a wave tearing her apart from within. Her breathing became ragged, and a cold sweat ran down her forehead. "No, not yet," she whispered, trying to get out of bed. She cried out for Aunt Clara, who rushed into the room, her eyes wide with fright. Seeing her niece's expression of pain and the stained sheet, she grabbed the phone and called a taxi. The nearest hospital was 20 minutes away. Every second was an eternity. Meanwhile, James, still with Eleanor's letter folded in his pocket, was in his apartment staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. His phone rang. It was the detective. "Sir, Ms. Eleanor was admitted to the hospital. It seems she went into premature labor." The glass of water fell from his hand. The sound of shattering glass was drowned out by the pounding of his heart. Without thinking twice, he grabbed his car keys and drove through the empty pre-dawn hours to the Hudson Valley. The city lights flickered as if destiny was sending him signals. Upon arriving at the hospital, sweaty and disheveled, he desperately asked for Eleanor Sterling. The receptionist hesitated, but seeing his anguish, pointed him to the maternity ward. In room 208, he saw her. Lying down, pale, eyes closed, doctors moved around her. Aunt Clara saw him and for an instant wanted to kick him out, but her eyes shone with something between rage and compassion. "You're late, but you're here." Eleanor saw him for the first time when they were pushing her towards the operating room. Her eyes opened, confused. He held her hand for an instant. "I'm here." She said nothing, just closed her eyes, overcome by pain. The delivery was complicated. Screams, medical orders, machines beeping were heard. James, outside the operating room, walked back and forth like a lost child. And then the sound that cut through everything. The cry of a baby. The doors opened. A nurse came out with a tired smile. "It's a boy. He's fine, and so is she." James fell to his knees in the hallway. Tears ran freely. For the first time, he felt the weight and blessing of being a father. Hours later, he entered the room. Eleanor was asleep. In the bassinet beside her, a small pink baby, eyes closed and fists clenched. James approached with trembling hands. He delicately touched the baby's head. "Hello, Noah. It's me." And there, in that instant, without contracts, without fortunes, without pride, a man broke down, and a father was born. A father's embrace and a mother's distrust. The dawn light filtered through the hospital room windows, coloring the atmosphere with soft golden tones. The only sound was the tranquil breathing of Noah in the bassinet beside the bed. James was sitting in an armchair, his eyes swollen and his soul in pieces. He hadn't slept in hours. He couldn't. Every glance at the baby was a miracle and a dagger. Aunt Clara, with a stern gaze, entered the room and handed him a small blanket. "Hold him. Babies recognize the heart of whoever loves them." James hesitated, but finally stood up and walked to the bassinet. His trembling hands touched Noah's soft skin. And then, as if the world stopped, he took him in his arms. Noah let out a small sound, almost a sigh, and nestled against his father's chest. James cried. In silence. Tears fell slowly, as if washing away years of hardness. He felt for the first time that something inside him was opening, a space that had never been touched before. Eleanor slowly woke up. Seeing the scene, her body tensed. The image of James holding her son was, at the same time, moving and terrifying. She spoke in a low but firm voice. "Who gave you permission to touch him?" James looked at her with red eyes, and his soul laid bare. "I didn't touch him as James Sterling. I hugged him as a broken man, as a father who didn't know how to be there in time." Eleanor looked away. The emotion on her face was evident, but she didn't give in. It's not enough to show up when everything is already done. It's not enough to cry. I carried this pregnancy alone. I cried every night alone, and I protected him from you, because you were the one who abandoned us. He approached, still holding Noah in his arms. He wanted to kneel, beg, scream, but he did none of that. He only murmured, "I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know, but I want to be here, even if it's from afar. I want him to know me." Eleanor extended her arms and took Noah back. She looked at him as one holding a piece of her own heart, and said, without hatred, but with pain, "You'll have to prove it. Not with words, James. With actions, and that takes time." He understood. He returned the blanket he was still holding. He gently caressed the baby's tiny foot and left the room in silence, his chest full of love and guilt. Silent efforts and a mother's doubts. The weeks that followed Noah's birth were a mixture of tenderness and exhaustion for Eleanor. Sleepless nights, unexpected cries, the constant fear of making mistakes. Everything was new. But there was also light. Every smile from her baby, every curious gaze was a reminder that it was worth continuing, even with a broken heart. James, for his part, kept his distance. He kept his promise. He didn't invade. He didn't insist. But he began to act in silence. He hired an excellent pediatrician to care for Noah, without them knowing he was behind it. He discreetly paid the hospital bills, and every week, a new anonymous delivery arrived at Aunt Clara's house. Diapers, ointments, carefully chosen clothes. At first, Eleanor was suspicious. She thought they were donations from the NGO, but there were too many details. The exact size of the clothes, the brand of soap she preferred, even a sunflower-shaped rattle, her favorite flower. Something inside her told her it was James, and that disarmed her. One morning, opening one of the boxes, she found a small piece of paper, unsigned. It just said, "I know I'm late, but I still want to learn to be the man you both deserve." Eleanor read it in silence. Tears came without her being able to stop them. Aunt Clara, always attentive, sat next to her niece and said, "I'm not telling you to forgive him, but there are men who change when love hurts them more than pride." Eleanor was still afraid of making a mistake, of opening the door again to a man who had left her in ruins. But she also felt something different. James's presence, though absent, was felt in every gesture. And that began to confuse the heart she thought she had shielded forever. Noah, with his big, lively eyes, seemed to notice that change. Every time he saw a new box, he waved his little arms as if he knew that there was affection inside, however discreet. And Eleanor began to understand something that hurt to accept. James was trying, in his own way, as he knew how, as he could. One rainy afternoon, Noah had a fever. Eleanor panicked, not knowing what to do. She called the pediatrician's number that the NGO had provided. In less than 15 minutes, the doctor was at the door with everything needed. Seeing him, something in his attitude, in his care, made her ask, "Who sent you?" The doctor smiled, hesitated a moment, but was honest. "Let's just say it's someone who still believes he can mend what he broke." Eleanor fell silent. She looked at Noah sleeping and whispered, "Perhaps, just perhaps." A night of shared worry and quiet reconciliation. It was a sweltering night when Noah began to cry in a different way. His little body burned with fever, and his eyes were glassy. Eleanor, desperate, tried to cool him down with compresses, but nothing worked. Aunt Clara called an emergency taxi, and in minutes, they were at the nearest hospital. In the emergency room, Eleanor tried to stay calm, but her hands trembled. Noah cried weakly, as if he no longer had the strength. The doctor examined him, but time dragged on like a punishment. It was then that, suddenly, the waiting room door opened, and James appeared. She didn't ask how he knew. She just looked at him with tear-filled eyes and said nothing. James walked towards her, and for the first time in a long time, he didn't try to justify himself. He just sat beside her in silence, like someone who understands that words are no longer enough. Hours later, the doctor informed them that it was only a mild viral infection, but that Noah would remain under observation for 2 hours. Eleanor breathed a sigh of relief, and turning, she saw James leaning against the wall, his gaze fixed on the baby sleeping through the ICU glass. "Thank you for coming," she murmured, without looking directly at him. He felt her emotion. "I couldn't stay home knowing he was unwell. Not again." The nurse informed them that only one parent could spend the night in the observation room with the baby. Eleanor hesitated. She was exhausted, emotionally drained. She looked at James, and with a silent gesture, she handed him the small backpack with Noah's clothes. "Take care of him," she said simply. James entered the room with a heavy heart. Noah was sleeping, connected to monitors and tubes. He sat next to the small hospital bed and took his son's tiny hand. He didn't sleep throughout the night. He sang softly the lullabies his mother used to sing to him. He made promises. He cried. He asked for forgiveness, not aloud, but with his gaze, with his touch, with his presence. Outside, Eleanor watched through the small window in the door. She saw James leaning over the bassinet, his face tired, but full of love. For the first time, she didn't see the proud man who broke her, but a father, a man trying to love well, and that moved her deeply. The next morning, when James came out of the room with Noah in his arms, she extended her arms. He handed her the baby with a soft kiss on her forehead, and before leaving murmured, "Thank you for trusting me, even if it's just for one night." Eleanor didn't answer, but inside, something was beginning to change. Not all the words in the world would have done what that silent night accomplished. Show her that perhaps he could still be part of their story, a heart-to-heart, and a path to forgiveness. The hospital was already quiet when Aunt Clara took Noah home, insisting that Eleanor get some rest. But that night, sleep wouldn't come. Sitting on the bench in the hospital's outdoor garden, Eleanor hugged her knees, looking at the cloudy sky. The weight of the past few days left her vulnerable and confused. James approached slowly, not wanting to startle her. He sat beside her, maintaining a respectful distance. For several minutes, neither of them said anything. Only the sound of crickets and the rustling of trees filled the air. "I don't know where to begin," he murmured, looking at the ground. Eleanor took a deep breath without responding. He continued, "I believed that by distancing myself, I was doing you a favor. I thought that by leaving, I was freeing you from the failure we felt. But the truth is, I left because I was afraid of being like my father, of staying, of failing you, of repeating his abandonment." She looked at him in surprise. She had never seen him so exposed, so fragile. "And then you decided to abandon me first," she replied with contained pain. "As if that hurt less." James nodded, his eyes full of tears. "Yes, and you don't know how much I regret it. Since you left, there hasn't been a single day when your absence hasn't pained me. I became everything I swore I would never be. A lonely, empty man with success, but without a soul." Eleanor's tears finally fell, not just for him, but for herself, for all she had endured alone, for the nights of fear, for the words that were never said. "You broke something inside me, James, something that took a lot to heal." He moved a little closer, his eyes fixed on hers. "I'm not coming to ask you to love me again. I know that can't be demanded. I just want you to know that I love you, as I never knew how before, and that, if you let me, I want to try to be someone worthy of you and Noah." The silence between them now was different, dense, filled with memories, with possibilities. Eleanor dried her eyes. Her heart was torn between the pain of the past and the echo of a love that perhaps still lived. But it was still too soon. The wound was still open, though it was beginning to scar. "Don't promise anything, James. Just show me who you can be now." And in that early morning, without kisses, without conclusions, only with truth laid bare, two hearts began to find their way back. Slowly, with fear, but alive. Aunt Clara's wisdom and Eleanor's choice, the scent of lavender and chamomile tea filled Aunt Clara's small room. Days had slowed down for the old woman, who now spent most of her time lying down, looking out the window where the bougainvillea flowers danced in the wind. Her body was beginning to give way, but her mind remained clear and her heart restless. Eleanor entered with Noah in her arms. Her tired expression mingled with tenderness as she saw her aunt smile, though fragile. She placed the baby beside her, and for a few minutes no words were exchanged, only glances, sighs, and a silent affection between 3 generations. "Now your son has your father's eyes," Aunt Clara murmured, stroking Noah's tiny hand, "and the strong soul of the Sterling women." Eleanor smiled sadly, sitting by the bed. Her eyes soon filled with tears. There was no need to explain anything. Her aunt knew that look, the look of someone carrying an unresolved love. "I saw him cry, Aunt Clara. He spoke to me like never before. He says he's changed, but I don't know if I can trust him again. I'm afraid to open the door and be broken again." Aunt Clara squeezed her hand with surprising strength for someone so fragile. "My dear, true love isn't about not being afraid. It's about feeling it and still choosing to love." Eleanor cried in silence, looking at Noah asleep. Aunt Clara continued, "To forgive is not to forget what happened. It is to choose not to let that pain chain you. James doesn't deserve a second chance just for wanting it, but you do deserve to live without carrying resentment." She looked at her with tear-filled eyes, but also with brilliant lucidity. "I loved once, and out of pride, I let him go. I lived many years with that thorn. I don't want you to live that way." Eleanor felt the weight and lightness of those words. It was as if her heart, until then silent, began to whisper. There was no definitive answer, but there was a path, and perhaps deep down, she knew that path involved listening to what love still had to tell her. As she left the room with Noah nestled against her chest, she looked at the pink sky of dusk and whispered, Maybe there's still something to save." A confession at the cafe and a path forward. The small cafe in the town square of Hudson Valley was almost empty when Eleanor arrived. She carried Noah in his stroller, and her eyes were heavy with unspoken thoughts. James was already waiting for her, sitting at a discreet table with a humble and anxious demeanor. Seeing her, he slowly stood up, but she made a gesture with her hand. "Today, just listen, please." He nodded without saying anything. He sat down. They were face to face, but between them was a broken bridge, made of memories, wounds, and unfulfilled promises. Eleanor looked at Noah, who was sleeping peacefully, before beginning to speak. "For months I slept in fear. Fear of not having enough to feed him, of something happening to him, of him being born and not recognizing me as his mom." Her voice was firm, but full of emotion. "You have no idea what it was like to feel the ground torn from beneath my feet. You were my home, James, my refuge. And one day, you simply left me on the street, as if I had never meant anything." He clasped his hands on the table, but remained silent. His eyes shone, but he didn't dare to interrupt. "I cried until I had no more tears. I felt empty, useless, and yet I never stopped loving you. I hated myself for it. How can you love someone who broke you?" She paused. She took a deep breath. But then, Noah grew inside me, and with every heartbeat of his, something in me was reborn. I discovered that the love I had for you was not weakness. It was my strength. I survived for him. And yes, also for what we once were. James contained his tears. His eyes were fixed on hers, as if every word pierced deep into his chest. "When I saw you at the hospital, when you held him, I saw the man I dreamed of as my child's father. But I also remembered the one who abandoned me without looking back, and that still hurts." She extended her hand, lightly touched his, and with a soft voice completed, "I don't know if I can trust you again, but I also don't want to live with this wall between us. For Noah and for what's left of us, we deserve to try." James finally spoke in a broken whisper. "Thank you for giving me this opportunity, even if it's with fear. I promise not to waste it." And at that instant, between tears and confessions, between pain and hope, something new began to be born. It was not yet a reconciliation, but it was forgiveness, and with it, the true opportunity, bound to start over. A father's joy and a mother's heart. It was a Sunday morning, and the sun timidly streamed through the window of Aunt Clara's small house. Eleanor had invited James to spend a few hours with Noah. They weren't living together yet, hadn't officially reconciled, but now he was welcome, with limits, with caution, but with space to be a father. Noah, almost 9 months old, was beginning to explore the world with curious eyes and wobbly steps. He was sitting on the living room floor, surrounded by toys. James, kneeling beside him, made funny voices with a teddy bear. Eleanor watched from afar, leaning against the kitchen doorway, with a mixture of love and doubt dancing in her chest. "This is the bravest bear in the world," James said, simulating a battle against a plush giraffe. Noah laughed with his mouth wide open, that laughter only babies know how to give. Clean, contagious, full of life. Eleanor allowed herself to smile. It was beautiful to see them together, but there was still a part of her that protected itself, an invisible barrier that time and gestures were slowly trying to dissolve. Then, suddenly, Noah babbled something. At first it was just a sound, but the second time it was clear, loud, clear, and unexpected. "Daddy!" Time stopped. James remained motionless, as if he wasn't sure what he had just heard. Eleanor dropped the kitchen towel she had in her hands. Noah repeated, now pointing his little fingers at the man in front of him. "Daddy!" James's eyes filled with tears instantly. A knot formed in his throat, and he fell to his knees, hugging his son with all the care in the world. "Noah, my love, I'm your daddy," he murmured through tears, kissing the child's head. Eleanor brought her hand to her mouth. She cried in silence. There was nothing left to say. At that instant, no promise, no explanation, no apology was worth more than that word pronounced with innocence and truth. Noah had chosen, and with a single word, he disarmed the past, broke down barriers, and showed that sometimes love only needs a sign to bloom again. A wedding in the hills and a new family. The sky over the Hudson Valley seemed hand-painted. Soft clouds floated lazily, and the air was permeated with the scent of wildflowers. On top of a hill, among old trees and a small wooden altar adorned with lavender, James waited. He was more nervous than ever. He was no longer the man of expensive suits and cold speeches. He was just a man in love, waiting for the woman who changed his life. The ceremony had been planned with simplicity. No luxuries, no photographers, no influential guests. Only the closest ones. Aunt Clara, some neighbors from the NGO, the nurse who cared for Noah, and the priest who baptized the children of the town. James wanted it that way. A new beginning, clean and pure. The chairs were filled with wildflowers. A lone violin played a soft melody. And then the murmur spread. "Here she comes!" Eleanor appeared at the top of the hill with Noah in her arms, dressed in white. The dress was simple, made of light fabric, but she looked like something out of a dream. The wind played with her skirt and her hair, and the baby smiled, waving his little arms, as if he knew that day was special. James saw her and felt his legs weaken. His eyes filled with tears. It wasn't just seeing her so beautiful, it was seeing her there, present, choosing him again, choosing them. When she reached the altar, Eleanor handed Noah to Aunt Clara and looked into James's eyes. He took her hands, and with a choked voice said, "I have no perfect promises, but I have a heart that now beats whole, thanks to you and our son. I want to love you, as one loves when they understand the value of loss." She smiled emotionally, tears rolling down her face. But they weren't of pain. They were of liberation. And I choose to trust. I choose to heal with you, because I learned that love is not the absence of wounds. It is knowing how to love again, even with the scars. The priest blessed them with simple and true words. When they were finally declared husband and wife, the applause was soft, but full of soul. Aunt Clara cried unashamedly. Noah, in her arms, babbled between laughs, as if he felt that everything was finally in its place. At the end of the afternoon, as they danced barefoot on the grass, James held Eleanor by the waist and Noah in his arms. The sun set behind the mountains, tinging the sky with orange and gold. And there, without luxuries, without an audience, the family that destiny almost destroyed and that love patiently rebuilt was born. A simple home, a full life. The house was small, with adobe walls, wooden windows, and a garden that Eleanor insisted on tending every day. There were lavender pots at the entrance, toys scattered across the lawn, and the constant sound of laughter, especially from Noah, who was now just over a year old, running after a stubborn chicken that kept escaping from the coop. James was on the terrace, barefoot, a cup of coffee in his hands. He watched the scene as one, witnessing the greatest spectacle of his life. His wife, in a light dress and her feet dirty with earth, guiding their son with patience and joy. That was everything he never knew he needed. They didn't live in luxury. Money was now secondary. He had left part of the business behind, ceding control of the company to his brother. He wanted time with Noah, time with Eleanor, time to be the man he always wanted to be, but only now knew how. Sometimes, at night, Eleanor would wake up with nightmares of the past. Sometimes, James would still reproach himself for all he had destroyed. But in those moments, a silent embrace, the warmth of the other in the narrow bed, was enough to remember that they were there, together, and that was already everything. Aunt Clara spent weekends with them, telling old stories, teaching Noah to plant beans in little glass cups. The house was never silent. It always smelled of bread in the oven. Soft music played on the old radio, and tiny footsteps could be heard running through the living room. James spent hours building wooden toys in the yard. Noah said, "Daddy," with pride, and "Mama," with tenderness. And every time he fell and cried, both of them ran to pick him up. There were no perfect roles. There was love, distributed, shared, present. One ordinary afternoon, the three of them sat on the swing made of ropes and a board in the garden. Eleanor rested her head on James's shoulder, and Noah slept in her lap. The sun slowly set, tinging the sky with warm tones, as if the whole world sighed in peace. "Do you think this will last?" Eleanor murmured. "I don't know how long, but I know that every day we're going to choose it," James replied, kissing her forehead. Because love didn't heal everything. The scars were still there, like marks of a war overcome. But love transformed everything. And in that modest house, with laughter in the garden and a gently creaking swing, there was finally a home. What are your thoughts on Eleanor and James's journey? Do you believe a love story born from such pain can truly last? Share your opinions in the comments. If you enjoyed this story, share it with your friends and subscribe to the channel to support our work. Another story is appearing on your screen that will probably move you too. Don't miss it.